I've been to some remote Second World War radar sites across the British Isles before, but none beat this. I've been to some remote Second World War radar sites across the British Isles before, but none beat this. It was the northernmost of the four transportable radar sets installed by the British on the Faroe Islands. And this station, just outside the village of Eiði, still remains today in albeit abandoned form. So let's have a look around and see what we can identify. The first thing that we notice about this station is that it was made out of reinforced concrete. And not unusual. Certainly a lot of stations around the UK, Great Britain were made from reinforced concrete just like this, and also brick. However, neither of those materials are natural to the Faroes, so all this material would have had to be brought in. You can see the fill is made really quite heavily with lots of this local stone and rock, and then there's a really heavy aggregate in the cement to make up the concrete, and that'll just be crushed local stone. It's taken me 30 minutes to hike here from the nearest road, which is just outside the village of Eiði, down at the bottom of the hill. There was about 300 metre of elevation gain, so no mean feat to bring all these resources and this material up here, even if they were transportable early warning sets that they deployed to the Faroes. I do have records that say the Cameronians, the Scottish regiment, did have universal carrier sections, so it's possible that some of this material was brought up in those tracked universal carriers, or using local resources and labour where possible. However, there wouldn't have been a great pool of local manpower to use, just because the population was so small and most men were already occupied. It looks like there are two phases of construction here, and we go up onto the roof of this sort of finer concrete building in the centre. We can see that's where the mounting points, the holdfast for the radar set, or the antenna set is. So it's likely that in here would have been the equipment room, sort of the transmit receive room. This building that we're currently in looks like a bit of a, maybe not an afterthought, but certainly a different phase of construction. And this may indeed have been part of a transition from transportable sets, which were vehicle mounted, into more permanent infrastructure, just as the occupation of the Faroes endured. We can see then, Shorter planks are used for the shuttering of the concrete for this section, whereas we have this has been done in stages. You can see, but we can also see slightly even smaller planks to make up that shuttering. So we'll now go out and we'll have a look into that little transmit room. So this is the first building I think was constructed on site. We can see it had a couple of windows, which are here, which one of them, well, both of them now lead into the rooms beside. Pipe here may have been for cables to enter, but certainly in the roof we can see that hole, and that does go up to the holdfast for the antenna on the roof, and we can see that when we go upstairs. And this hole, this was also done after the fact. This would have been knocked or drilled through and filled in later in line with an iron pipe. And there's very little else to say. No other markings. There are some witness marks or some wooden plates that are up around the walls. These are likely to track cables from whatever equipment was mounted inside here. So rather small and unremarkable. We'll have a look next at the room next door, but I'm going to have to wipe the lens off before I do so. So I'll see you around the far side. So we've just come out of the room on the other side of the steps, those steps leading up to the roof where the antenna mounts are. We can see there's our hole that was bashed through the wall up there, and then we come into this this other phase of building. No windows as such. There is a vent which leads outside, and we just have some shuttered concrete walls. I've not found any markings on any of these walls. Now, at the very bottom of that wall, there is what looks like an air vent, but I think because of the angle the concrete has been poured at, that this may indeed have been for cables to come in and out. So it's possible that this room might have been a generator room, because obviously powering this equipment was reasonably difficult. Now, there isn't the usual plinth for a generator in the middle of the room. There's a hole in the outside of the wall, which may have been for fuel to come in and out, or that may have been for the exhaust. So just because these buildings don't follow a standard pattern that we're used to around the rest of Great Britain, doesn't mean they weren't used for those purposes. And until I find some plans of this place, I won't be able to say for sure. But really what is important to say up here is just the remoteness of this site and all of these radar sites. This island, while reasonably large, wasn't connected to the mainland. It's only connected now by road tunnel. And these were the only, as far as I know, this was the only group of military that was stationed on this island during the war. So they'd have been very remote, with resupply having to come through boat, truck, and possibly even, as I say, the universal carriers to bring them what they needed to live up here. And I imagine they'd have stayed up here for weeks at a time, because logistically it was just so difficult. So there are some buildings on this hilltop over there that I think may have been part of the residential site. So you don't want to be living right next to your high power transmitter, and we'll have a look at those on the way back. But here you can just see the layout of that building a little bit better. We have our small, what I'm going to call the transmitter room there, with the antenna holdfast on top. The little generator room that we were just in is over there, and then this other sort of ancillary room, which should have had a wooden roof by the looks of it. Both the others obviously have the concrete roofs. May have been the sort of the equipment room where the tracks were plotted. And all around the site, so we can see one just in front of us here. We can see a loop above this door. We can see another concrete pad here, where almost improvised holdfasts, presumably to support the antenna structure. So here, just using some angle iron to support the antenna structure, because up here, and this is a good day, although I did have a ferry cancelled on me this morning because of the high winds. But this is a reasonably decent day in June. It's 2nd, 3rd of June, but it's still gusting maybe 30 miles an hour, and it's been pretty wet all morning. So we're now going up the stairs, and we'll have a look at the holdfast for this antenna, and there we have it there. So it's, I haven't counted this, is it 1, 2, 3, 4, octagonal in shape. We have some steel bolts around the outside. We have some sockets for wood here, which I imagine are for wood. It's possible they would possibly be part of the steel frame. And there's the hole down into the room down below. So I will have to try and look a little bit closer and identify what radar equipment was installed here and see how that fits with that mounting. But there's some of the iconic coastal views and cliffs of the Faroe Islands in the distance. It's almost as if the Faroes isn't a country for beginners in many respects. And that certainly would have been very different in the 1940s for the first soldiers and airmen and technicians that would have come out here to construct, but also to work at these stations. And right, so this is the main part of the site that I'm going to call the technical building down here. And we can now venture a little bit further down the site to see what else remains. Keeping everything dry is difficult in this weather, and also trying to protect the noise, because obviously I'd like you to be able to hear me without the battling wind. So we can see the technical buildings just up on the hill behind us, and then we have this curious ancillary building on the lower part of the site. Small single cell building with a porch. There's a single window probably looking east into a fjord. It almost looks like a small observation post, but I don't think it necessarily is. I'd have expected more windows or loopholes if it was. There's some holes in the outside, like we saw in the possible generator building just down at the bottom, where something has obviously been able to enter and exit, whether it's cables or communications. And we come in. So we come in just to this sort of porch or entranceway. We see evidence of the sockets where the door frame would have been. And then we come into, as I say, this pretty small single cell building. There's the doorway behind us and the incredible view that the occupants of this building would have had. So curiously, there would have been no No running water. There would have been electricity that would most likely have been self-generated, but no running water or anything up at this site. So we think of ablution blocks or toilet blocks. We're probably thinking more buckets that would have been emptied over the side of the cliff. No evidence on the floor of any mountings that I can see. On the walls, doesn't look as if there was any wood panelling mounted on the walls. However, we can still see the wire ties from where the shuttering was tied together before the concrete was poured. So that's very common, and I always think that's a nice feature to point out whenever we see it, because I like to understand how these buildings were constructed. And there we can see what I can only imagine are remains of a window frame at some stage. Not much of that is left at the moment. So unsure what this building may have been. But where we're going now is just over where the two modern masts are. We're going to go over and have a look at what I'm describing as a potential domestic site here, just because soldiers would have had to be here for very long periods of time. It may be slightly later. We'll have a look at what's left, and we'll see if we can identify that positively. Right, so we'll brave it and head our way over here. So along the route is this metal conduit, which is just before the little small building that we were just in. And this contained a couple of cables, which we can see exposed there. We can also see slightly further up as well at all these points where there are breaks. We can see the cables exposed, and if we look closely, we can see some of the rubber sheath that surrounds them. Now this conduit, it looks like it came up and it's been ripped up from this. If you look at this, it looks almost like the bottom of a wall, but I think those are stones that were piled up to protect this cable. And if we look back, it runs all the way back to the other site. So there may have been a telephone line installed up here, and the steel we can see is the armouring from that telephone line. I'll have to check the records. I know some of the remote radar sites did have a telephone line installed to them for communication. But yeah, as nothing else has been installed in that headland since, it's a very good assumption that is contemporary with the construction of the 1941, 1942 radar site. And yeah, as you see, you can see this raised bed of stones joining the two sites almost up here. So we've still got a little bit of a way to go. Yeah, it's not too far. It is getting cold, given that I've left the UK in 22, 23 degrees Celsius heat. I've come here, and with wind chill, the forecast says feels like 1 or 2 degrees C. I can definitely believe it. I've got gloves in my pocket, I've got my hat on, got my thermals on and my waterproof jacket. So it's an unusual choice for a summer holiday destination. But then again, I'm doing it because I find it interesting and enjoyable. So next time I speak to you, we will be all the way up here at what I'm calling the domestic site. So we made it to the second half of the site. We can see just up in that headland where the radar head would have been. Really an ideal spot. This building in front of us is associated with the towers behind, and looking at the design, I think it's certainly later than our 1940 radar station. But having a look, there are a couple of, and we'll have a closer look at these in a minute. We've got some stone walled enclosures Down here, 2 of them, which are reminiscent of some sites in Shetland, I believe, around radar sites. They may have been bases for, possibly bases for antennas for the radio communications up here. But what we're going to try and have a look at and decipher now are these 2 buildings. One of them has pretty much collapsed. The second building is still standing. So if you remember the construction of some of the annexes and second phase of building up at the radar head, these look very similar with the wooden roofs, the coarse aggregate, cement and concrete. Right, so we'll make our way down to the first one that is collapsed, and we'll sort of make our way through the site. It's got so cold I've had to put my gloves on because it really is just a biting wind up here. So we've got, I'm calling this a domestic site because I imagine there would have been personnel living and working up here 24 hours a day. So it may not exactly have been, so if they were on the island for a period of weeks or months, I imagine a lot of the time they'd have spent down in the village themselves, but if they were on duty maybe for 24 or 36 hours, they'd have come up here for rotations. So main part of the building has collapsed. It seems to be single skin concrete walls, which don't look reinforced. They seem to be made out of concrete blocks. We'll have a look at that. And then we have this sort of entrance cell at the front of the building, which is still there. So, oh, and that's interesting. So we can see some of the aggregate has been taken from the beach. Sort of a shell. Right, so we enter the building. We see we have another small cell or cubicle on the left. Now I'm imagining this may have been where the toilet was, or the toilet bucket at the time. It's got a window, and it's small and separate from the rest of the building. You can see out the window to the second building and structure there. We've got these little stone enclosures, or one of them there, with the main technical site just up on the hill over there. And then coming into the main part of the building itself, as I say, the walls here have collapsed. And we can see they're made out of, so this is, and it's the first time I've sort of noticed this. So we've got a large natural stone in the middle. It is a concrete block, but the concrete block, the core of it is made up of the stone, but it has been levelled out with concrete. So they've almost made natural stones into regular shapes just for the ease of construction. Yeah, very interesting. So we look at this back wall, large hole, possibly with some sort of ventilation. Not quite sure, because the stove base is over here in the middle of the room, which is what makes me think it might have been more domestic. So we have the stove base there. Perhaps there was a cooker. So we have the stove for heating, and then there might have been a separate cooker range there. Not too sure. It's very hard to interpret these sites, as I say, if they don't follow a standard pattern. We're left trying to interpret what remains. So there's a small partition about 3/4 of the way up the building. Small partition wall here, single row block, and this does appear to be made of. No, this is also poured concrete, just that very rough aggregate pour. And most of this has collapsed in, just like the rear wall has collapsed. But look at that view. If this indeed was domestic, and you're waking up with that view from your stove heated accommodation, that would be very pleasant. And there we are at the far end, looking like so. Single window here. Stove in the middle, windows at the far end. in an environment like this, the more windows you have, the colder it must have been. But yet the fewer windows you have, the darker it would be. Given that this time of year, we're talking nearly 12 hours of daylight. I think it sunrises about 4 a.m. Gets dark after midnight. So what's that? 18 hours, sorry, of daylight. Looks like another window socket here from this section of the wall that has fallen. And actually, I don't think these are blocks that I referred to earlier. It looks like these are courses of pour of concrete, presumably because of the logistics, getting water up here, getting sand up here, getting aggregate, and getting the cement itself up here would have been really difficult. So it looks like these have been, these have been poured. This has been let to set. Normally, when you're trying to pour layers of concrete, you don't want it to dry out, and you want to leave lots of sockets to sort of connect the layers together. That hasn't quite worked out in this instance. And there we have on the inside, just huge. They've chucked as many large natural stones in there as possible, just to try and take up the bulk, to save them carrying it up here. And yeah, there's no reinforcing in there at all, so it's just fallen down with age. So there we go. That's the first building. But we spent a bit too long on that. So that I'm calling the sort of the domestic building. So it looks like it's got a stove. That's possibly where people would have lived. But then up here, this slightly more unusual building. It's larger. It's got an entrance to this end. It has an entrance hallway at the other end as well, and it's much taller. It's more like a sort of an equipment room or a hall that you'd expect potentially lots of equipment to be in. So here we can see construction method appears to be the same. We've got these large lines between pours, where the pours haven't quite connected with each other. So we come in the entrance hall, and yeah, here we are into this shell of a building. One window in the back wall. All this cable is modern cable. It looks like they've decommissioned some antennas from the towers, and the waste has ended up in here. Yeah, two large windows in that gable, that wall, one at the end, and then the door on the left is the other porchway for coming in and out, and this room on the right is a yet unspecified room. I'm not entirely sure what that would have been. It may have been some sort of equipment room. It may have housed a generator, because same again, just like the other room up there we saw, we have this sort of louvered concrete sort of ingress and egress into the room. So that's the second large room, and if I don't try not to trip up, it does look like there was a stove base just here as well. The one in the other building was slightly larger. Yeah, up here we've got what was probably the exit flue for the stove. So yeah, really interesting, given that we are at an incredibly remote location on the Faroe Islands, and we're walking through a British 1940s radar station. So next on our list is we're going to go out and have a look at these two stone enclosures, and we'll see if we can work out what they are. So there are two of these enclosures sitting to the back of the station, and at first glance they may be enclosures for sheep, or maybe shepherds in the past. Sheep being reasonably sheep are really the only animal that can graze in the landscape of the Faroes. However, I'm not entirely sure that they are ancient. As I say, there are some structures like this, I think, if I can remember right, around some of the northern Shetland radar stations. In the centre, very, very well built, tight stone wall. And if we look So we're talking, so I'm standing down, let's say the ground level has raised slightly, so we're talking chest height, maybe shoulder height, with the ground level at its original. And it does have a dogleg entrance, which is very useful for stopping the wind, but also stopping any blast. So one theory I have is these may have been used just because of where they're placed. We can see them here, far enough away from the main buildings, if the main buildings were attacked. And German aircraft did attack the Faroes on a number of occasions. It was far enough away that fighters, unless launched from an aircraft carrier, such as the Graf Zeppelin, fighters didn't have the range to venture to the Faroes, but sort of mid and long range bombers did. And quite often, reconnaissance aircraft were very frequently around the Faroes. But these possibly could have been area shelters. I'm slightly tenuous when I'm saying that. But they were certainly to protect something, and they may have protected equipment, because if we look in the second one over here, there is a little bit of a clue that may reinforce some of those theories. Sorry, I'm going to need to wipe down the lens again. There we go, that's a bit better. So construction seems exactly the same. We have the dogleg entrance, albeit this one has collapsed somewhat, so if I can get in without moving any of those stones, it would be very good. And we come in, similar size to the other one, but in the centre there appears to be a holdfast. So we have concrete here with 2 bolts visible around, there's a third, the end of a third bolt there, around what looks like a bit of a circle. So these may in fact, maybe these are light anti-aircraft gun positions for protecting the radar station. So we do know from records that a number of the stations had defences. Effectively the crew that were at these stations were responsible for protecting it themselves. There was no, at these remote outstations in particular, there was no backup. Yes, you could call for help, but should a raiding party be mounted to land at the village and come up to this site, the site staff were really on their own, and that goes for aircraft attack. So I think these may be 2 anti-aircraft positions to protect this radar station. Light anti-aircraft guns, we're not talking Bofors, we're probably talking Lewis guns, and possibly even Bren in the anti-aircraft mount. We do know there were quite a number of those on the Faroes, landed with the enduring force that protected the islands. So incredible, right? That really concludes this tour of the Eiði, and I'm sure I've got that pronunciation wrong. We've got our technical site up on the hill. We've got potentially these 2 light anti-aircraft gun positions, which is absolutely fascinating. And then we have what may be the more domestic site as well. So I hope you have enjoyed this video. This is just one of many to come out of my Faroes trip. Hope you've enjoyed this. I hope we get some sunshine with a little bit less wind and rain. However, I don't mind if we don't. It just makes getting all that extra B-roll and video slightly more difficult. So from Eiði Radar Station, goodbye, and I will see you in the next video.